In this video, I want to take a quick overview of the files that were installed into our project by NuGet whenever we added Bootstrap 4 to our web project. So right off the bat, you'll recall that there were two folders that were added by NuGet, a content folder and a scripts folder. Inside the content folder, we'll find the bootstrap.css. There are also some other variations on it, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then there's the bootstrap.js and some other JavaScript files. So right off the bat, there are two portions to Bootstrap. There is the styles that are defined in the CSS, and there's interactivity and functionality defined in the .js files. All right. Now, in the case of the bootstrap.js, there is a dependency on jQuery. That's why we have those files pulled down for us. And essentially, the bootstrap.js file is a jQuery plugin. So if you're already familiar with jQuery, you should at least be able to understand how they implemented it at a high level. All right. Now let's start back here and in the content folder, talk about the minified versions of both the bootstrap.css and .js files. Hopefully you recall what minification is. It's the process of taking the code, whether it be CSS or JavaScript, and to minify it by removing all the white space, by changing any variable names, using one character if possible, and so on. And the thought process is that if you can make it as small as possible, you reduce the number of bytes that need to be delivered every time one of the pages are requested from your website. So that's good. You may be less familiar with the map files, and those map files are in a JSON file format, as you can see here, as I just click on it and we can view it in the main area. And you'll also notice that it's referencing something called SCSS. These are SAS source files, the source files for Bootstrap 4 in the SAS CSS preprocessor language. And so what the map files do is allow you to run a tool like F12 Developer Tools or Chrome's DevTools, and you can make a selection on a given style, and instead of just seeing the CSS, you'll be able to actually map back to the original SAS that generated that CSS. And you can temporarily even make changes to the SAS and see those changes reflected inside of F12 Tools or Chrome's DevTools. I'm not going to demonstrate how to do that. It's a little bit advanced. But if we did want to go about doing it, what we would probably need to do is make sure that we installed the .sas files using that second install package command that you see on screen for NuGet. So we get the SAS files, not just the Bootstrap files that have been compiled. All right. But at any rate, the same would be true then for the map files for jQuery. If you ever needed to do any debugging, then the map files will allow you to get back from the minified version to the full version of the jQuery file where you can see exactly how it's implemented. All right. You can also see that we get an IntelliSense file, which will provide IntelliSense inside of Visual Studio. There's no such file for Bootstrap. Fortunately, Visual Studio is smart enough to take a look through the styles and just add them to IntelliSense automatically. Let's just briefly talk about what's inside of the bootstrap.js file. You'll note that it's actually a combination of several different files like util.jss. Scroll down a little bit further and we can find there's another called alert.js. And so all of these individual CSS files have been, here's button.js, they've been combined into a single file, but they can also be isolated and used one by one if you don't need everything inside of the bootstrap.js. You can pick and choose the parts that you need for your application to further reduce the amount of bytes that have to travel across the internet. But essentially, these are all jQuery plugins that have been created to help with one of the following. In some cases, they wrap existing JavaScript functionality, making it easier to call and configure certain parts of JavaScript. In other times, they're providing the component functionality, like the carousel that we looked at, as well as things like drop down and pop over, tabs and tooltips, and even some of the button functionality. And then finally, it also provides some definition for animation effects, like there's this collapse effect that's defined inside of the bootstrap.js. So my recommendation here is that you not make any changes to these unless you really know what you're doing and you want to pare down the amount of code that needs to be transmitted over the internet. Typically, you just leave it alone unless you really have a compelling reason to touch it. Okay.